You're listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zinno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. Before we get started with this week's episode, with somebody who has connections back to where I went to school. Not only that, he's undertaking some amazing projects and telling veteran stories. We'll get to that coming up in just a few moments. But first, our normal announcements. Please give us a follow on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Continue to leave us Apple reviews. I keep getting notifications that we're getting more and more Apple reviews. So thank you guys very much. Wherever you get your podcast on Apple, leave us a short review. Give us 5 stars. Tell us why you love the show. It's going to help grow this podcast and grow this Hazard Ground community. And we certainly appreciate all the love and support that you guys give this show every single week. It means the world to us. So thank you. Also, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Give us a thumbs up, like, and subscribe. You can watch all of our episodes there, including all of our videos that we put up. So our YouTube channel is there. Don't forget to download the Kill Cliff TV app, where you can also get all of the Hazard Ground episodes in video format as well. And of course, don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com, click on the Amazon button at the bottom of the homepage or under the sponsors tab. You can do all your normal shopping. It's coming up around graduation time. Want to go buy gifts? Go to Amazon.com or go to Hazard Ground first. Whatever you spend, we'll get a percentage of that, and then we'll donate a percentage of that back to some of the charities and organizations you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. So it's a great, easy way for you guys to support veterans charities across America just by doing Amazon shopping, but you got to go to hazardground.com first. And don't forget about our good friends over at Kill Cliff. Go to killcliff.com to order all of your Kill Cliff. This is their CBD Killer Cliffsicle. If you're into CBD products, Kill Cliff makes the best clean energy drinks. They're a fantastic company founded by a former Navy SEAL. And I know these people inside and out. I use their products. It is an amazing company, and their products are great. So killcliff.com, order your pre-workout, your post-workout drinks, and their entire line of CBD at killcliff.com. All right, on to this week's episode with a former Marine who spent 6 years in the Marine Reserve with a couple of deployments overseas. He is now a writer, editor, and educator. He's the editor of the anthology Retire the Colors, Veterans and Civilians on Iraq and Afghanistan, which is a bunch of short stories from people who were there. He also became the distinguished graduate of the John Hopkins University M.A. in writing, and he's currently working on a screenplay about a Marine's return from war. He is Dario DiBattista joining us here on the Hazard Ground. Dario, welcome, brother, and thanks for joining me. Thank
you, Mark. Very happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Full disclosure, everybody, I bumped into Dario on Twitter. And it's funny, I find a lot of guests there just because military Twitter and the military space is very, very connected, right? If you have one or two military friends and they're talking to somebody else, but you know, the minute I saw you and started reading through your tweets and saw your background, I was super interested in hearing your story because it's very unique. I mean, we've had a lot of other writers and authors on before, but then when I saw that you were from the Baltimore area, I went to Loyola. So you're in that area and you know the school area very well. So it was like there was another sort of symmetry between us. So it's great to get you on. And I think the other thing that I found really interesting in your anthology, Retire the Colors, one of our former guests and a friend of mine, Brian Kastner, was one of the short stories that was told in your book.
Yeah, it was quite a privilege to be able to work on that collection. Honestly, my job was more curatorial than it was editorial, you know, giving instructions on authors how to write and why. And Brian Kastner being the stature of author he is, you know, he sent me something. I'm like, perfect. No discussions needed. Thank you so much, sir.
Yeah, Brian's as sharp as they come. But let's go back for you and tell your story about how it started and why and when you got in the Marines.
Yeah. So, you know, unfortunately, this story is common and, you know, I'm not trying to perpetrate any stereotypes, but I was not a very good student, right? College was not in the cards for me. My GPA, my counselor said I had the lowest GPA possible she's ever seen of somebody who graduated, and I believe her. But I always wanted to serve. You know, I don't necessarily know why, but I just always been compelled to doing something of service bigger than myself. again, not a very good student, not very disciplined. I was just kind of reading the tea leaves of my future and realized if I didn't make some big changes, things were not going to go well for me. So I thought about joining the Army, Navy, Air Force. It just so happened a bunch of my friends out of high school were joining the Marines, and I watched Full Metal Jacket, and I was like, oh, that sounds like fun. So I signed up for it. But Mark, I knew nothing about the military. I thought I'd go to boot camp, and if it didn't work out, gave it the old college try and go home. And I actually graduated boot camp 2.5 weeks before 9/11. So the stakes were not quite the same as I think a lot of the guests on the show who to me are incredibly courageous to say, hey, that's the decision I'm making, knowing that this is probably what's going to happen.
Yeah, because I know you signed up in 2001. I was about to ask you if it was pre or post 9/11. I would have just assumed it's post at that point in time. But, when you signed up in a pre 9/11 world, it was a much different sort of mentality heading into the military. Sure. The world was hunky dory back then.
Yes. I remember our drill instructors, they created an apocryphal enemy, somebody to motivate you, screaming, I bet the Chinese are training harder than you. And even at combat training, we were still going through the motions of this is what lessons we learned in Vietnam. Nobody really had the global war on terror on their radar.
Yeah, there wasn't certainly on anybody's date book, that's for sure. So did you find boot camp to be a massive physical struggle?
I did. I was a little runt, so I was able to do the physical stuff weirdly, just kind of like skinny, scrawny, but had a lot of endurance. To me, they're all more of a mental challenge than they are physical, just the fortitude of finding out what you're actually capable of when you're being pushed. I still remind people in the movies, they say, drop and give me 20, drop and give me 20 is easy. In the Marine Corps, they say, just push, and you just keep pushing and you don't know when you're going to stop. Right.
Yeah. It's the open-ended question that you hate, or the open-ended order that you hate. Just start running. Well, how far? Just go, We'll find you when we need you. But it's interesting. You mentioned how you weren't a good student. So, just out of curiosity, like in the big arch, how do you go from not a good student to a master's in writing at Johns Hopkins? Does the switch go on for you at some point?
It's a great question, Mark. And I think people who knew me in high school are flabbergasted by the change. And, the military is a deeply personal decision that many people make for many reasons. But for me, it's a direct arc from all the intangibles and this conversation about learning what you're made of, and still to me from boot camp, that just made college seem pretty easy in comparison. Nobody's trying to kill me. I'm not on orders, on standby, in a battle for a month at a time. It's just a lot of those intangibles, leadership, fortitude, the ability to synthesize, understand information quickly, kind of cut out the bullshit, find out what's important. Paradoxically, I don't stress about it. So that's why I do well. Whereas I think if I did stress about it, I probably would not do as well. Does that make sense?
No, absolutely. So did you enlist in the Marine Corps Reserve, or how did that whole thing come about? I mean, eventually you deploy, obviously, but what was your contract?
Yeah, I signed up as a reservist.
Okay.
Again,
now, is that what you knew you wanted to do? You were going to do the part-time deal the whole way?
I wanted to go to school. That was the reason I joined the reserves. And also, as I said, I didn't really know anything about the military. I probably should have asked more questions before I joined.
I made the same mistake too. I feel like in retrospect, I should have asked a lot more questions when I was younger, but you live and you learn, right? Trial by fire.
But after 9/11, it didn't make sense to me to be a reservist. I was at combat training when the towers fell. I wanted to go active duty, and I did everything I could to make that happen. And spend a lot of time on active duty. It was a very weird time, Mark, as I'm sure you remember, being a reservist, Lance Corporal in that time. You were very much just a utilitarian, a platoon person. I did force protection in Kuwait, not my MOS. I was able to do civil affairs for my second deployment. They were literally just taking volunteers and saying, go over there and you'll figure it out on the job. It was just a really unprecedented time. They just, I hate to use this phrase, but they literally just needed bodies. And because I wasn't really tethered to, a stateside mission, I was able to volunteer for lots of stuff, which was pretty exciting overall.
Yeah. Well, listen, hey, the idea of volunteering for a deployment doesn't come along often, right? Usually told where to go. So when you get the opportunity to sort of do something that you're geared towards, or at least are interested in, it makes it a little bit more tenable. So that said, you finished boot camp right after 9/11. You're now back to being a civilian. So how quickly do you actually deploy or get to active duty? Or, I mean, timeline wise, what does this look like?
So I went from training pretty much immediately to active duty. I worked as a recruiter's assistant in Towson, Maryland. Excuse me. That was a really tough job. Not a lot of people interested in joining the military right after 9/11, when, you know, the economy is great and there's a lot of opportunities for people outside of that. You know, so we did a lot of area canvassing, phone calls. You know, it wasn't my job to get people to sign up. It was my job to get them into the office to talk to the recruiters. So it was a pretty interesting job. Learned a lot about, again, you know, just intangible skills, building relationships immediately, learning how to read people, learning how to communicate well. All these skills were things I was able to build upon to help me, you know, crush the civilian world after military experiences. You know, something as basic as the Marine Corps is very poor, as you know. If you don't have friends, like, you're really going to struggle. You need to know somebody in admin. You need to know somebody in supply, somebody in ammo, who can just hook you up and make things happen, or you're going to struggle. I learned later that's called business development.
Yeah, so one of those fancy civilian terms that the military never uses, but it certainly applies, to say the least.
It's the skill I've used as a writer to build relationships with other writers, other editors. Never take something for nothing. Be humble, work hard, and, you know, just be a part of a community. You know, I think these are basic concepts that some people miss out on. You know, just from having different life experiences, or just being taught, like, hey, get your degree, take care of yourself, and make it work. You know, I never want to overstate the veteran experience, but there's just a lot from it that just helps you be a better community member, but be a better citizen, just having gone through it.
No, 100%. I mean, that's you know, we talk so much about the veteran space and the post-combat veteran space, right? I mean, that's supposed to be part of the draw to acquiring and hiring veterans, right? Self-starters and understanding, you know, how to do things with very little instruction, how to operate in a complex environment on a fairly routine basis. And like you said, no one's shooting at me, so everything else is negotiable at that point in time. So, you know, we bring a whole different skill set to the table that a lot of other civilians don't have. You mentioned that you got to Kuwait. So what happens after the recruiting job? I mean, do you take the first thing hopping overseas?
I did. And again, it was just a very unusual time. For some reason, my original unit was 4th Rations Company in Anacostia, DC, right near Bowling Air Force Base. It was like an annex of that. And it was mostly cooks and supply people. And for some reason, they thought I was a cook, but I didn't tell them I was a cook because I didn't want to not be able to go. And they took 20 volunteers initially. And again, we were just parceled out like minor league baseball players. 3 of you were going to this unit, 4 of you were going to this unit. It turned out weird. I don't even know the term, ironically, to be a really good decision, because everybody else who stayed behind had to do mortuary affairs, which is an incredibly solemn, but just absolutely devastating duty. Everybody I know who did that has gone through some real hardship. But yeah, first deployment was not particularly interesting. You know, I feel
there's nothing interesting about Kuwait ever, period.
Yeah, you know,
sand. If you're not in Kuwait City, the whole place is sand.
It's, you know, a lot of imposter syndrome. You know, and it was a weird thing. Like, I just tried to make myself useful. You know, we needed, they called it force protection. We would have third country nationals come on base to clean out the shitters, bring in potable water, those sorts of things. But obviously they needed somebody to watch them to make sure they didn't do anything nefarious. So that was just me riding in a truck with somebody from Pakistan and making sure they didn't put a bomb in the toilet. We did get attacked via surface-to-surface missile. You know, and that was without warning. Even though we trained, the siren would go off. You'd have a minute to put on your gas mask, get in a bunker, all of that. You know, so me just being 19, my first exposure to combat is a 150-pound warhead exploding, you know, maybe about a half mile from my where. It was pretty shocking, and the alarm would go off and over and over again. Out of everything I've seen since then, snipers, IEDs, rockets, mortars, it was really, really scary. It really makes me think, like, we hear a lot about what's going on in Ukraine, and just the thought of just constant bombardment. I've lived through that, or at least the fear of it, and it's really traumatizing. And it's just, it's not even considered combat, as you know.
No, well, that was it. That was my second deployment for a better part of it during the closeout of Iraq, and was there for all of 2011. And it was just the worst thing is having zero control, right? If you were going out, it's because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, and you had no idea that was the wrong place at the wrong time, right? Because mortars were just landing nonstop, and we weren't doing anything to stop them. And so it was a, multiple time a week, nighttime occurrence. And it's one of those things where, when you think back to it, it just became such reflex. The horn, the siren goes off, you hop out of your bunk, jump out of your chew, run to the bunker, and you just sit there and you wait, and in the hopes that, the bunker doesn't get hit. Like, maybe I was better off staying in my room, maybe the bunker is the wrong place to be. You never know. So that's a different level of torment. I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world, but it certainly can be grating on you emotionally after a while.
Sure. And my buddy was right near the explosion. He couldn't really communicate for days because his hearing was just gone. That adds like a level of realness to it. And to your point, we didn't get any alarm. So I'm wondering, was I just exposed to chemical or biological agents? Again, it was a different time, didn't have different information, but I had a gas mask attached to my leg. I had needles I was supposed to inject in my thigh if I was exposed. It was really kind of psychologically terrifying in a way that somehow, direct combat is less of, because I feel like for whatever reason, you have more control of it. Like, I can run, I can dive, I can hide, I can shoot back, right?
Well, and you also know where the bad guys are,
Yeah.
I don't have enough time to orient myself to look up and see a mortar or a rocket on its way in and figure out that I'm supposed to move. It's not a fly pop to left field. you don't get that much chance to get your eyes on it. So it's a different world. How long did you stay in Kuwait?
Was there for 5 months. Again, there were some rumblings that we might be needed to stay. Again, the rest of the unit was repurposed to do mortuary affairs, and it was the burgeoning of the insurgency. So it was a one question of, are we going to go home? Do we need to stay here?
When did you get there? What time frame is this? What month, year?
I arrived in Kuwait in February of 2003, and I left in July of 2000.
So the invasion of Iraq happens while you're there.
Yeah. And I didn't even get to go into Iraq, which is like really embarrassing. You come home because of operational security. You don't get to tell your family where you are. And yes, I agree, relative safely. Like, yes, we have surface to surface missiles coming in, but we also had Patriot missiles that worked very well. And it's a very large base. So yes, the odds are low on some level, but you can't call home and be like, hey mom, I'm at Cap Commando Kuwait. Everything's great.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So people are like, tell me about Iraq. I'm like, I don't fucking know.
All right. So that deployment ends. You come back and you're looking for another new assignment immediately?
Yeah, I wanted to go, Mark. I had that thing that I feel a lot of veterans get, this sense of duty, always wanting to do more. No matter what happens, always wanting to do more. I think about somebody like Corporal or Sergeant Dakota Meyer, who earned the Medal of Honor, who had that famous beer summit with President Obama. And in the speech, President Obama had to say, hey, I'm telling you, as your commander-in-chief, you did everything. You didn't need to do more. And here's a Medal of Honor winner who's still like, I feel like I should have given more. It's like, you did it, man. Yeah. But I felt that. I felt like I wanted to contribute. I wanted to go. And I did. I did feel embarrassed that, I had served as a Marine and been deployed and not actually seen combat or whatever. So they were looking for volunteers for something called Civil Affairs. We had a crusty old staff sergeant who had done it in Kosovo, and he was just taking volunteers. And, I raised my hand. I volunteered again. We went
Did you know what Civil Affairs was?
I had no idea.
So far you're a cook, which you weren't trained to do.
Yeah.
And now you're Civil Affairs, which you weren't trained to do. You've really you've kind of cracked the code on the whole system here, by the way.
Yeah. Like I said, very unusual time. In the Marines, we say on our own program. Yeah, I was able to do that pretty well. They said, you'll be on patrol with the grunts and you'll be doing like nation building stuff. I didn't really believe them, but it was pretty. I got myself in over my head a little bit, I think.
How so?
So that deployment started. We were in Camp Fallujah, and there's this sense of we're going back to Iraq, but this is kind of like a mop-up mission. We're not really going to do combat. We're going to hand out soccer balls and do goodwill stuff. And the numbers kind of reflected at the time. I know, any number of soldiers or service people dying is a big deal. But in February of 2004, there were only 11 service members who had died in Iraq. So we thought we were just relieving the army. We're going to be there for 6 months and then we're going to go home. But, that was shortly after that, there was the Blackwater contractors were hung on the bridge in Fallujah.
Yep.
I was at Camp Fallujah when that occurred. The Abu Ghraib incident happened or came to light, and that inflamed the insurgency as well. I think it was General McChrystal who said pretty much everybody we tamed talked about Abu Ghraib being something that recruited them to wanting to fight America. It just became really violent. Some of the most violent months. April of 2004, I think, was number 2 all time. I was in the command element of the 4th Civil Affairs Group. And their job was basically to brief the general. I think it was Haig at the time, and Mattis was out there. But our role was minimizing the impact on military operations on the civilian population. And what does that mean in the first Battle of Fallujah? We would covertly resupply hospitals. We would escort humanitarian convoys into the city. We'd find place for displaced civilian camps, refugee camps, if people needed them. It was really dangerous.
In what way? I mean, dangerous in the sense that getting caught meant you were going to be, detained and possibly beheaded or whatever, or is it just you were actually in legitimate combat and doing so, or both?
So we worked very closely with a Jordanian hospital, but they didn't want to be seen cooperating with the Americans because that would have made them a risk. So we would go in at night covertly, and there were insurgents in the area. One of the officers called in an airstrike on the north side of the compounds. I have Blackhawks flying over me. There was a cloverleaf at the time, not too far from there, right outside the city, where there was a lot of combat happening. And, frequent rockets, mortars, inbound, outbound, some landing very close, close enough that I reach over my body, like, am I hit? I've seen shrapnel fly over me. And when we were escorting humanitarian convoy in the city, there was sniper fire. We didn't know where it was coming from. So taking evasive action, all of that, it stuff that's never going to make it into a Hollywood movie. But for me, it was pretty intense.
Yeah, no, I mean, the sniper fire is fun. It always keeps you on your toes, right?
Yeah.
But that said, so do you witness any sort of casualties while you're doing this?
Yeah, we saw some bodies that were not able to be reclaimed when we would go into Fallujah, particularly with the humanitarian convoys. If you remember, the situation was very much reactive. The Marines started doing some urban combat and kind of like infiltrating the city. Mm-hmm. And then there was kind of a international push to like, okay, let's take a break. Let's take a pause on this and figure out what happened. The first Battle of Fallujah basically set up the second battle because they just wanted to reassess, give an opportunity for non-combatants to get out of the city and, just make a real plan on how to go through and make that happen.
Yeah. My first deployment in 2005, that was the one time when the pucker factor really hit me, is when I was told, okay, you got a convoy to Fallujah. And I'm like, you do what? You want me to go there? They're hanging people from bridges over there. I got to go there.
Yeah.
That was the part. Well, and then it was in 2005 when they, the Marines were all, was a 14 of them, I think it was, that were executed there. And so, that's the one city that I drove 2 hours north on the road, with less fear than I did on a 30-minute ride from Baghdad to Fallujah. It was a place that you did not want to be.
Yeah, those places have a reputation, unfortunately earned, but it didn't end there. We had a tactical level civil affairs team. Again, that's just 6 to 8 Marines who were embedded with a infantry battalion. who got hit, and 2 of them had to go home. So I got sent out there as a combat replacement. That was actually with 3-7, and Corporal Dunham was killed reacting to that. He was the Marine who leapt on a grenade to try and save his comrades. And my first day of the combat replacement was his memorial ceremony. So out of the fire into another fire. But there, you know, I gotta say, Mark, my job was incredibly fascinating, and I think vastly different from what most Iraq and Afghanistan veterans have. We looked at the infrastructure. That's what makes a government go. It can be divided into categories: power, electricity, healthcare, governance, security, education, fuel. And it was kind of our job to visit different places, schools, power plants, phosphate fertilizer plant, you know, meet with the leadership and think, okay, how are we going to support you in getting this business going? The thought was, if we could give people security and stability and give them jobs, that would give them less of a reason to want to fight or be friendly with the insurgency. You know,
that was the theory for like a decade, just in case anybody was wondering.
Yeah.
Same in Afghanistan for 2 decades, but you know, we're not going to talk about the validity of it one way or another.
Yeah. You know, and
if we install democracy, nobody will want to fight.
Yeah. You know, it is kind of unfortunate in retrospect, Mark. You know, I think that's the tragedy of it all. You know, I first of all, never not including the local populations, the regions destabilized, and that, I mean, you're talking generational hardship. But I think the vast majority of people who went over there did it, and they tried their best to do what they were being asked to do, which was to create security and peace and freedom. You know, and I thought we were doing a lot of good at the time. We were building schools, we were getting people employed. You know, we were meeting with the police chief, the mayors, everywhere we go. Again, this would be a different thing. We were welcomed. Whereas like the door kickers, probably not. But people knew we had money, and we were awarding money for infrastructure contracts. So they're rolling out the red carpet. And, you know, we didn't have enough people to really do missions. You know, you need at least like a certain amount of vehicles, a certain amount of up armor weapons, but we get all sorts of different grunts volunteering with us because they know they would actually get good food. They wouldn't have to eat an MRE. They could have authentic shawarma before anybody in the world, in the Western world, knew what shawarma was.
Yeah. You know, and it's interesting because when you talk about, you know, you did the best job that you could and you thought you were doing good. And anybody who's listened to this show routinely has heard me talk about the phrase small victories, because I had that same challenge over there when I was there on my first deployment. Like, I remember sitting down, I was a captain at the time, and I was talking to a major, and we had worked very closely day in and day out, and I respected the hell out of her. And, you know, I just flat out said, I mean, you know, I look at a group of people that I'm training, and on one day it's like, they look like they could actually survive in combat. And on the next day, they're failing to use a toilet and just going to the bathroom on the floor. It's like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I'm like, I feel like we're just chasing our tail. Is this ever going to make a difference? And all she said to me was, take small victories. It's all you can do is take the small victories and just try to build more small victories on top of that. And look, I know when I left my first deployment, I remember writing this down in a journal, that it was better than when I first arrived. And I guess that was enough for me. I don't know what the finish line was supposed to be or is supposed to be or where it was supposed to be. I just know that I started here and I progressed forward. Whatever the measure is for that, I'm not necessarily the one to decide, but I know I did my job, and I know that the soldiers in the Iraqi army that I trained were better after I left, right, than before I got there. And so for me, that was enough of a victory to measure success, if you will, and know that you did a good job. But in the grand scheme of things, did it actually matter? I'd probably lean on no, it didn't matter, because look where they are now. But still, for that small patch of time that I had control over, I exerted the control I needed to.
Yeah, Mark, I got to tell you, you know, my background as a writer, I got into it because I was mentally, emotionally disturbed when I came home. You know, I went from Fallujah to being a waiter at Chili's. You want to talk about a manic transition. You know, you have
By the way, there's a certain level of danger at Chili's in general. It's just different. Who knows what they're putting in those baby back ribs, you know?
I mean, you want to talk about a mind fuck? We had a kid who would sell sodas who got his arms chopped off, and you got people screaming at you for like another Coke. Like, can you get me another Coke, Chief? It's like, whoa, dude, my God. You know, and it was, I never get into the arguments of who has it worse than whom. I worked at Walter Reed for about 8 years, teaching writing as part of an art therapy program for service members who have PTSD and TBI. And that experience became the genesis of my book, because everybody I met who was an Iraq and Afghanistan veteran, regardless of if they were Air Force, Navy, Army, Marines, Coast Guard, whether they were an operator or whether they were some sort of support role, there's just a crazy universality to this experience, and one that was shared uniquely by all of us, just the nature of not having a draft and being at war for 20 years. But the unique challenge I had was I didn't get to be with my battle buddies. You know, I came home and it's like, okay, dude, go be a civilian. Turn off everything that just happened, everything you experienced, and just live your life as if nothing profound just occurred to you. There was no conversations about PTSD, mental emotional health, those sort of things. We did a 2-week decompression time where we weren't allowed to do anything on the way back from Iraq. And I was like, okay, you know, that was probably more challenging than day-to-day operations, because you just want to go home, right? You know, so I got into creative stuff because, you know, it was a way of helping me write, reflect, make sense of some of the places I had been, some of the things I had done. You know, and I think I had squared all that away, and I had been well and happy and made my peace with everything. But now that it's all ended, there's a certain amount of closure. You know, ended the global war on terror. Obviously, there's military operations going to be happening everywhere forever. But you know, these wars, the global war on terror, the big part,
the big two.
You know, it just caused me to do a lot of reflection. And, you know, there was a time I would say I was very proud of my service and being a veteran, and I'm still proud, and I'm still thankful for the experience overall. But, you know, there is the sense of like, what was it for, man? You know, what was the point?
Yeah. You know, I try not to go down that rabbit hole. I understand it, but, you know, for me, it's one of those things where, you know, a lot of those things were out of my control, right? I mean, I had 2 deployments. I did the very best that I could. I don't think I left, for lack of a better term, you know, I left it all on the field. You know, there were no points left on the board for me. Like, I did everything I was supposed to do and then some, and I'm okay with that. I'll let history be the judge of what our impact was, and should be. I mean, I got very annoyed at the Monday morning quarterbacking after the withdrawal of Afghanistan, and it was being done by tons of people who never spent more than 24 hours there in any given period, which I thought was a bunch of crap. And for those of us who lived through combat, and for those of us who understand the notion that even if nothing bad happens to you while you're over there, even if you come back with all your fingers and toes and limbs and everything intact, the person you were before combat dies, and you're never the same again. The experience in and of itself doesn't allow you to be the same person. If you went through anything over, even if you just lived there for a year, there is a chance that you'll never be the same again. And it's hard to, I don't want other people judging that for me. That's what kind of bothers me. You don't get to put in context the service and sacrifice that we put out there based off of some political notion of a win and a loss. Like that, I thought was a bunch of crap.
Yeah, I agree with that. You know, you just talk about lack of context. I mean, so many people just have, you know, I don't know. I read somewhere most Americans haven't even been to more than 4 states. You know, what is your frame of reference if everything you've learned is something you saw on a subreddit somewhere, right?
Yeah. When you leave Iraq for the second time, well, the first time you were there, but the second deployment, and you come home, are you done with the military? Like, do you feel like you're done at that point? Was the experience enough to emotionally worn you out?
No, I volunteered for a 3rd tour. You know, and I don't mean to be dramatic about it, but everybody who I got mono, which was kind of divine intervention. I'm at like the age where I'm not supposed to get mono, you know, 23. And, I wasn't making out with a lot of girls, man. But everybody went in my stead, got pretty fucked up or wound up dying. So I kind of took that as like divine intervention. I got all my fingers, I got my toes, modicum of sanity. Actually, one of the Marines, who was my officer in charge, you're probably familiar with. He was a motivational speaker named Justin Constantine. He actually wound up just passing away recently.
Yeah.
He got shot in the back of the head. I just promoted to major, and that made him a target on the battlefield. And if I hadn't gotten mono, I would have been right there with him. He was an awesome man. Just take a moment to make a tribute. I went to visit him at the hospital after all that, and he was just concerned about everybody else. He wasn't even worried about himself. They didn't have a face, and he's asking about everybody else. It was really moving.
Wow. So divine intervention steps in, and you say, "Hey, I'm done. I'm gonna even hang. Even though I've spent most of my time on active duty, I'm just gonna hang up the reserve thing as well."
Yeah. At the time, I had been meeting a lot of people who had gotten out of the service just for different things. Again, my Marine Corps experience was awesome. I was able to do Toys for Tots. People think that's hanging outside Best Buy with a bell, begging for toys. Like, no, we were in DC, and I was getting invited to hang out with like executives, CEOs, their personal parties, hobnobbing with the literal 1%. I made friends with like the CEO of IBM at the time. I'm meeting GS-15s, executives and governments. I'm hanging out at the National Democratic Club, drinking and, singing karaoke with like the whip at the time. So it was a pretty wild experience, but it introduced me to a lot of people. And, I met a vet who was just very jaded. He had some sort of aircrew mission, and he was telling me he had a Valor device, and, he was getting out, and he was having problems with VA and his paperwork. And he just felt very mistreated. And, you get to those points where it's like, okay, contract's going up. Am I going to stay? Again, it causes that reflection. And for me, I realized, will I do 4 years or 40? At some point, I got to figure out who Dario is, not Dario the Marine. Those are different things. Mm-hmm. Just having done the experience, I'm always reminded of the line from Fight Club. On a long timeline, everybody's survival rate is 0. Like, why am I just going to keep doing this? At the time I had felt like I did my part, and that became not true when the wars just kept dragging on and people just kept going and going. But I did get to work with the military and wounded warriors at Walter Reed for 8 years. And that's how I was able to stay in the fight, Mark. The Marine Corps didn't need fat 34-year-old Corporal Dario anymore. But, I have Navy SEALs who've told me, now that I have writing in my life, I don't want to put a bullet in my brain. And that's just awesome. Nothing I did, just being a part of a program that I have a very small role in, working with some of the best therapists and clinicians in the planet, and just giving people the tools to help fix themselves. It was really awesome stuff.
I mean, you sort of stumble on this opportunity here. But, working with the veterans it keeps you as connected as you can be to the fight, right? And you realize that there's a whole second half of this, like the first half is the actual combat. The second half is repairing everything after the fact. But where does the writing come in for you in that interim? I mean, I know you said you went to work at Chili's, but you said you were a bad. Did you get your degree while you were in the Marines, while you were going along somewhere over in Iraq? How has that whole thing come to pass?
No, I got out of the Marines, and I didn't have a plan, and I thought I was supposed to go to school. I didn't actually qualify for the GI Bill because I didn't pass it to 2009. So I found out that it's a true story, Mark. I found out that Connecticut will give free tuition to anybody who served overseas, regardless of their state of origin. So I went to tour all the state universities in Connecticut. The first one I went to had a giant Iwo Jima memorial, or a mini Iwo Jima memorial on their campus. So I was like, okay. And I just went in, and they took me on the spot. I needed a place.
Or divine intervention, right?
Yeah, I needed a place to live. So I was able to become a resident assistant. I thought that was just kind of like being like an NCO. I'm just going to take care of people, make sure they don't hurt themselves or each other. And I meet this woman. I had been doing writing. I had been blogging and, putting my feelings out there, and I got a lot of encouragement. And I was just, not that I was good. I was not. I was a very bad writer when I first started, but I had a fresh opinion. There weren't too many people who had come from the battlefield and were writing about those experiences. And I meet a woman who used to teach at Hopkins. She's at Central Connecticut State University. She asked to see some of my writing, and she was like, Dario, I think your story is myopic, egotistical, and boring, and I don't know if you have a commercial project. So I signed up for a class, and she kind of looked at me like, what are you doing here? I'm like, you know better, teach me. And she became a mentor and dear friend, and that's really what put me on the path for becoming a writer.
That's awesome. Does she now still think your story is myopic and egotistical and boring?
No. And I will tell you this. This is a story I don't tell very often. I did get involved in the Marine Corps at the time had this thing called Marine Corps for Life, where you could meet people who had gotten out of the service who also had the Marine identity, and they could be kind of like professional mentors. And one of them was like, dude, your story sucks. You need to stop sending it. You're embarrassing yourself. Right before the pandemic, he actually was like, dude, you made it. I'm just so impressed with what you've been able to do. And he actually hooked me up with a freelance project. So it's pretty rewarding. I think this is probably true of a lot of military people. Just stubbornness to it, man.
Now I'm curious to read the story. Like now I genuinely want to read it see how bad if it does suck, if I'm of the same opinion as everybody else.
Well, I won't show you an early draft, but I'll show you like where it's at now.
Okay. Well, I'm just, I mean, if it's based in historical fact, right? It's your personal story, or
yeah, I didn't have the education of being a writer. I had an interesting perspective, and I was honest, and that can help you tell a good story. But I didn't know what made up a scene. I didn't know point of view and how to use it effectively. I didn't know how to create dramatic tense stakes and create tension and use characters intentionally. There's so much to a Masters of Arts experience where you just really approach it like a craft, like a skill versus just a talent or innate ability, and helps you really re-hone and refocus that. And
you just reaffirmed my desire to never write a book. I'm a great storyteller. I like the verbal telling, but if you ask me to write it down, I'm gonna write like I speak, and that doesn't always translate well.
Mark, and that's a very weird, interesting thing. I became a writer, and I was asked to be on a podcast speaking about an experience I had where I did, unfortunately, one time consider suicide. And it's weird when you write it. It's like, okay, it's out there. You can do with it whatever you want, but telling it speaks into existence and creates a certain different sense of ownership, which is really powerful. So very much respect for you, but I do think they are very different skills for that.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, no, I mean, it's worlds apart. That old thing when you met, what a therapist said, when you're mad at someone, write them an email, but don't send it. Get all your emotions out on paper, write them and just don't send it. Unfortunately, I've never not hit send. That's my problem, but we're a different podcast altogether. Anyway, so how do you end up at Johns Hopkins?
Again, my mentor at Central Connecticut State, Mary Collins, she had been a part of the program. I didn't really necessarily want to move back to Baltimore, but it was an opportunity I couldn't say no to. I'm pretty sure she called up the director, was like, "Dude, just give this kid a chance," right? So I was able to get in, and I worked my ass off. Just literally, that was it. I didn't have a plan B. I wanted to be a writer. That's all I wanted to do. And I used my GI Bill, and I took out student loans. And for 2 years, I just treated it like a fellowship, where all I did was read writing, study writing, and just get involved as much as I could. And a program like that, I hate to say it, it gives you legitimacy that you wouldn't have otherwise. Nobody cared when I said Dario, a writer. When I said Dario, candidate at Johns Hopkins University writing program, they're like, okay, I'll listen to what you have to say.
Sure.
And in a program like that, you're meeting editors. They come to your class. To me, that's an excuse to be like, hey, thanks for coming to class. Do you mind if I pitch you something? And again, just taking skills I learned in the military. You take one success, you reinforce it, you move to the next target, make it bigger, you branch out and you grow. I wrote a small blog for a guy that got seen by another writer who gave me an opportunity to write a blog for the Washington Post. When bin Laden was killed, I was in the Washington Post Rolodex. They called me up, asked me if I would write a reflection about that as a Marine. and it's like a small blog to a bigger blog to an opportunity to write about one of the biggest events in the 21st century for one of the papers of record. And it doesn't happen if you just don't put yourself out there and take those successes and grow and just keep moving up and building your networks and making those connections. Really, honestly, just very basic skills I learned in the military, connecting with different people, learning who they are and how you can work together and how you can support each other.
And just for the record, I mean, you mentioned the Washington Post. Your work has also been featured in the Washingtonian, the New York Times, the Guardian, Mike.com, NPR, BBC. I mean, your work is everywhere. So if you were looking for legitimacy, folks, if that was as if Hopkins wasn't enough, there you go. There's more legitimacy for everybody. But was there any part of you, as you make this transition, was there any part of you pulling you back saying, I want to still be a Marine? Or were you able to sort of like sever ties clearly?
No, I wanted to continue to serve however I can. I wanted to become an embedded journalist somewhere in Afghanistan, reporting what was going on. I was teaching adjunct at the time, and I was having students come off the battlefield, and their stories were just blowing my mind, Mark. And maybe you have some more frame of reference than I do. I'm sure you do, because you've talked to lots and lots of people. But even when Iraq was really, 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 really bleak, I still think we had a sense of what we were trying to do and how we were trying to do that. I think that North Star got lost with Afghanistan vets a long time ago, and in an impossible way. I had my buddy, my co-RA at Central Connecticut State, wound up becoming a Marine officer and deploying to Afghanistan. He was telling me, I don't know what my flag officers are telling me. I don't know what to communicate to the troops. And I only have a vague sense of what we're trying to happen. So I wanted to go out there and report on that, because I think there was a information vacuum. But ultimately, I was never able to find somebody to support me. And, I thought about going back, but, I just kept meeting with vets, at university. One of my colleagues or one of my fellow students at Johns Hopkins is a gentleman named Ron Capps. He started this organization called the Veterans Writing Project, of which I'm a founding member. He was literally like after class, like, hey, Dario, I have this idea to take what we're learning here and give it to vets for free. Do you want to be a part of that? I said, hell yeah, signed up immediately. And that led to our work at Walter Reed. We worked with thousands of wounded warriors. We've taught in 22 different states to veterans of every age, and their family members. I taught a workshop at Baltimore County Public Libraries where I had a Rosie DeRiveter. I think those experiences in a way are just so rewarding to help other veterans learn the craft of storytelling and how to tell their own stories. Because it's not a zero-sum game. I want every veteran writer to have a ton of success. I want all of their stories to be told so the American people understand it. They have conceptualization, and they understand their role and impact that they can have on the veteran community and political affairs and international affairs and those sorts of things. It's an unpopular opinion, but war is kind of a democratic process. The military doesn't choose for it. The people we elect are the ones who make those decisions.
Yeah.
So if you're pissed about Iraq and Afghanistan, why'd you yawn about it for the last 20 years, right?
Yeah. Why'd you vote for the same people for the last 20 years? Also begs the question. And you and I are in the same industry, right? Of telling stories. You're just doing it via written, and I'm doing it via audio, video. And the point is that these stories absolutely need to be told. And the one thing, and I've said this often on here, and for those who are fans of the show and listen routinely, that this is one of the things I'm more proud of, but surprised that when I started The Hazard Ground was I never thought about chronicling history, but that's exactly what is going on here. In 20, 30 years, when people want to look back on the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, they can come right here and hear firsthand accounts, the same way they can read from your writers firsthand accounts of their experience. And I think we are at such a time, we don't have firsthand. We have very few firsthand accounts of the Civil War. We have very few firsthand accounts of even Vietnam and the Gulf War, because we never really were in that space where we wanted to talk about them so much. We are in a different world now where we encourage people to talk about it because of the trauma that coincides with combat. It was just something we didn't do before. We patted our boys on the back and said, welcome home. Or in the case of Vietnam veterans, spit on them, whatever. But you get the point. It was just not something that we do. And You talk about your letter to the Washington Post. You glossed over a little bit, at least some of the details, and I want to bring them to light because I think this is important. But you talk about a lot of the friends and the people that you knew that you lost, and the guilt that you felt. When do you come to grips with your own sort of, PTSD, whatever you want to label it as? When do you come to grips with that on your own, and how did writing sort of help you through it?
Well, Mark, I think some of the honest thing is, while I will say that I'm happy and I'm mentally well, and I'm blessed enough to have resources, therapeutic if I need them or if I want them, which I currently don't feel like I do. I'm reminded with every year of those losses, particularly around this time of year. And it doesn't affect me every day, but in some ways it's going to hurt forever, to think about those sacrifices. But the writing, if you're writing, particularly if you're doing true stories, I mean, it's really kind of a therapeutic process by design. You're writing about a past version of you as a future version of you, and it forces you to reflect, make meaning, craft sense, ask those tough questions. Why did I feel this way back then? What was I doing and why? How did I feel then and how do I feel now? And also, how does that impact my day-to-day life? Any creative, and it doesn't have to be writing. Again, at Walter Reed, the service people would make masks. They would make these, take these plaster masks, Roman style, and they would, the direction was to create something that speaks to your experience. And you can read about this on National Geographic. These masks are very famous at this point, and they've done literary analysis about like themes and topics and all of that. But there's an excellent TED Talk completed by my friend, Melissa Walker, who was the lead art therapist and program manager of this program at the National Intrepid Center of Excellence. And she talks about this service person who was haunted by this experience of they were under attack, and he was in a bunker, and somebody injured with a bloody face came into the bunker, and just that image just haunted that person in their dreams every day, everywhere they went. But when you take something that's put in your lizard brain, your limbic system, your evolutionary impulse, it's like imprinted there for good reason, right? Like if something traumatic happened, your body wants to remember it. And you use your higher brain functioning, writing, art, music, dance, whatever, to take it, you're able to take something toxic, something kind of primordial, hard to access, because when you access a traumatic memory, your physiology reflects it, your cortisol goes up, your adrenaline goes up, and allows you to shape it, make meaning of it. I don't mean to overstate. I'm not a clinician, but I've talked with a lot of smart ones and worked with them, and they say in general, yes, Dario, that's an okay way to express this.
Good.
I hope that's, yeah, and I hope that's not scientific. It's kind of a no duh thing, right? Like expressing myself makes me feel better, right? But the really cool thing about the program there is like they're doing like the quantitative, qualitative, arts-based research to validate that, and with amazing results. And Mark, it's not a magic eraser. While I did have some vets who'd be like, wow, now that I have writing in my life, I feel like I can deal with my demons. Some people be like, yeah, that was fucking dumb. I don't understand how poetry is going to help me. Whatever.
Right. Yeah, all shapes and sizes, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about Retire the Colors,
Sure.
and how this whole project came about. Obviously, look, from your time in Iraq to working with veterans and getting intimate and close with them and understanding their individual stories along the way, my guess is, you have all these recesses of stories in the back of your head and you just want to kind of find a way to put them all together. Like, what's the genesis of Retire the Colors? Because technically you didn't write anything for it, right? Am I right in saying that? It was everybody else's story that you sort of conglomerated, if you will.
Yeah, I just, my biggest intent, Mark, is I got into writing because I was mentally messed up and I wanted to communicate how I was feeling. I didn't have the ability to be at a bar and have that conversation with people.
Right.
But I was able to sit down and focus it and shape it and say, hey, please read this. I realized you and I represent a generation of men and women many of whom can't, won't, or don't want to talk about their experiences. So that makes it even more important for those stories to get out. We've had less than 1% of Americans having served in Iraq and Afghanistan. There's this incredible divide, cultural, social. It's most Americans have not met a combat vet, for instance, or have a personal relationship with that person. So I've always been interested in gapping those worlds, but also just making it clear, like, war doesn't affect just the war fighter. And it doesn't have to be, I was a Navy SEAL and I'm affected. There are people in support roles who are getting rocketed, mortared. They're part of a complex geopolitical affair that they have to make sense of, reflect on. It affects their spouses, it affects their friends, it affects their community. So I just wanted to curate a collection that kind of explored all of that from as many different angles as possible. There's some people who talk about decisions on the battlefield. One of them is a wife of a combat medic who has nightmares, and she has to, she's getting triaged in his sleep. Just all sorts of really scary stuff. I was able to include an international perspective that I was proud of. The cultural attaché of Iraq wrote a perspective of her experience in Iraq as, somebody on the ground, but like civilian Iraqi. There was somebody who, his son's best friend, who he took in for a time, who was a Marine who was killed, just really connecting all those sorts of threads between how the military experience, whether you're aware of it or not, is not just affecting those 1%ers of people who've been over there, but also communities, families, culture, all sorts of other things. And that was pretty much what I wanted to do. I did fight with the publisher a little bit. Ultimately, they wanted to do stories that were redemptive of quality, but that's not my agenda. War canon does fuck people up for life, and I think those are valid stories too. And if that doesn't make you feel good, I don't give a shit. But I wasn't able to get those in, right?
Very well put. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to just write that down as a quote. Dario DiBattista, warrior fucks people up for life. If you don't like it, I don't give a shit. There you go.
Yeah, again, I never want to perpetuate the myth of the broken veteran. And I know a lot of VSOs dealing with these challenges, but like, no shit. There are some people I know, and I know who will never be the same people and will not be able to function on the same level because of the experiences they had.
Yeah. And I don't think that, see, again, people who don't have the depth of understanding for it, like you and I can understand that a lot easier than many other people can. And like, they know it, but they don't know it. Like they can only empathize. They can't sympathize. And I think there's a gap there, which is tough to bridge for certain people, not for everybody. There are people who dive in, and really try to immerse themselves in the post-combat experience and try to understand what veterans are going through. I've run into some of them who have never put on a uniform a day in their life, but they work with veterans every day and they're really good at it. And then there are others who not so much, I mean, and to your point, full disclosure for me personally, and I've talked a little bit about this on here, I didn't really dive into my issues until 15 years after combat, like in my first combat experience. Like it wasn't until recently that I sat down and finally sought the help that I didn't realize I needed a long time ago, to really start, peeling back the layers of the combat experience for me, and then you think about it and I realize it's just like people have asked me, but I've never really answered the question until you're forced to sit there and tell the actual stories the way that they were recounted for factual purposes, for medical and, documentation, things of that nature. You're peeling off Band-Aids that you didn't really know still had wounds underneath them. And that's a difficult experience for a lot of people.
And even being in the space and doing this work, like you, I've talked to thousands of vets and exactly about their experiences. Right. And I've read hundreds, if not thousands of stories. There's an outstanding, probably one of the best essays I've read about the Iraq and Afghan experience. A guy named Brian Box wrote a piece for New Republic called Ghosts of War in the Wisconsin Forest. And, it's just about him trying to find peace by protecting nature after his experiences. That's a very surface level thing. But there's a line in there where he talks about friends he served with who he doesn't know if they're alive or dead. And I realized I have friends I've served with who I didn't alive or dead. And I don't think that's a normal experience. people that I intimately knew on some level who I have no idea where they are. I have no idea if they're okay. And I have no way of getting in contact with them. That's something I never realized was weird because that was just my world.
No, I mean, listen, it's funny because I'm literally going through this right now as we speak. I had to go through a similar experience. I had to get for verification purposes for the VA, I had to get a statement from somebody who was in the vehicle with me when we hit an IED. And I thought, we were friends and we kept in contact, shortly after we got back. I thought I'd just go on Facebook and find him. Nope, wasn't there. Right. And start just Googling around and looking for it. Nope, can't find him. Nope, don't know where he is. This, that, and the other. And eventually I just had to start hitting up other people I knew that knew him. I'm like, have you spoken to so-and-so in any given period of time? And eventually I found him and he was in Canada. Go figure. That experience, it's kind of weird. It's like, okay, we literally bled next to each other. And I don't even know where you are.
Mark, it's, there's a lot of layers there, and just a lot of things to unpack. And, just even being in the veteran support space, just seeing what's not there, what needs to be there. It makes me happy to have my small role in this as a veterans advocate, helping other vets tell their stories. We're working with veterans in different capacities and different roles that I have. But it also just makes you aware of the need and the impact and how underserved it actually is. And, when looking at that through different layers and intersections, how complicated it could be for people who don't look like you and me. It's just really, it's just so much. It's just so much. But, for me, it really starts with, let's help people tell those stories. Let's get those stories out and let's help people create awareness and understand. I taught for many years at CCBC. I teach adjunct faculty at different places. And oftentimes I would have them read a nonfiction book about the Iraq or Afghanistan experience. And surprise, 100 out of 100, I'm batting 1,000 on this. People who did not know anything about the military now have thoughts and feelings about Iraq and Afghanistan, the veteran experience, the military experience. It's kind of the gift of literature. It's a uniquely interesting vehicle for connecting people and helping people understand each other and their experiences, which is the most fundamental human thing we do.
Oh, 100%. So you are actually, as I mentioned at the top of the show, working on a screenplay right now. What's the process of this? What's the story about? What do you hope to get from it? Do we expect to see Dario DiBattista on the big screen soon?
I hope so. It'd be awesome. I worked very closely with a co-writer, my friend Jeremy Schiller. One of my hot fire takes in the veteran space is like, it's great that veterans can and do help each other, but we need to bring in more outside people because we have our own ways of doing things, our own sense of cultural norms and procedures. It's very useful to have somebody who doesn't have those experiences and ask like, what? You did that? Why is that? And it impacted you how? Things like we just kind of generally understand that might need more clarification for another audience. So it was very important to me to include my friend Jeremy, who's a great writer and a great editor. And again, I think the military experience, especially stories that we talk about on here, stories of combat, being overseas, dealing with all the many implications of that for the people who went over, the people impacted. It's just such a monumental, massive thing. People can and will be writing stories, telling stories in books for hundreds of years. And it's just kind of inaccessible. So I thought if I could write a story that's funny, that might be a better way of connecting people to that experience. So the elevator pitch is it's basically Jarhead meets Road Trip. Service member comes back from overseas. He's returning home after getting from the service, and he goes on a buddy adventure with his best friend, where they go to Las Vegas and get drunk and act stupid, and they meet a girl. But the thing that is not said is the real mission for the road trip, which is he has a death letter from one of his friends who died that he wants to get to the family along the way.
Wow. So where are you with it?
It's a different world, Mark. I understand.
A lot of pitching, lot of pitches.
it's getting it out, getting it different competitions, people saying, hey, it's great, I like it, and then nothing happens. If somebody out there wants to help with support, I'm not too proud to beg. But I've unfortunately, for myriad reasons, I'm in a doctoral program right now. I'm studying education. That keeps me pretty busy, a bunch of other things. I haven't been able to promote it as much as I could, but I would love to get that story out there. And I do think the approach we took, which is to make it basically a comedy, there's drama in there, obviously. I think can help bridge gaps and make that experience a little more accessible, understandable, and hopefully a way that people would understand. Because I get it, Mark, like the world sucks, man. There's shit everywhere. There's shit in our adopted home city of Baltimore. There's shit affecting people overseas right now, enduring war, being bombed every day. There's people starving. There's so many challenges. And, I think, what we're talking about on here is one. And I think people just are overwhelmed to care. There's just so much going on. It just kind of makes you desensitized to stuff. But I do really believe in the power of story in helping to bridge those worlds, create awareness, and create understanding in ways that obviously I would champion. I want people to know about the veteran experience and care about it.
What do you miss most about the Marine Corps?
I don't think anybody's ever asked me that. I always get, would you not do it if you did it over, right?
Right.
Or was it a good decision? Which of course I'm also ultimately like, yeah, I went from 1.88 GPA to Hopkins graduate. Like that's directly attributable to what the
Marine Corps.
My job is civil affairs, even though we went into the futility of nation building by military force and how it ultimately doesn't work, was probably the most rewarding time that I've ever had, because the work we did impacted thousands of people and in ways that, to your point, at the time did make their lives better. And that was immensely rewarding. I liked that. And I liked when you pare everything down, you don't deal with the day-to-day trivialities, what's trending on Twitter, kind of the banality of first world existence in a very privileged country. And it's all about just taking care of everybody around you and doing your job as best you can. There's a liberating sense of appreciating life in a different way that I know and I know many veterans experience. And again, something that's hard to express. Miss those experiences.
What's the biggest skill? I know you've said repeatedly that, your writing is attributed to being a Marine and your ability to turn it around. But what's the biggest skill that the Marines gave you that you applied routinely when it came to writing? Was it just persistence, or is there something that you took with you that you always relied on?
So it's not just the Marine Corps, Mark. And if you'll bear me for a quick aside, sure. I think every service person, because of their veteran experience, is overqualified to be a writer should they choose. And I will explain to you why. Number one,
you got my curiosity.
And I saw this every week at Walter Reed. We would have service people write, and they've never written before. And I'm like, that's a fucking awesome story. How'd you do that? Number one, stories are about people. And when you're in the military, it forces you to understand people in a different way than almost any other civilian job I've had. Right. I bartend part-time. If my co-bartender is having a pissy day, I just don't bother them and don't talk to them. But when you're a leader in the military, and particularly in combat scenarios, who do you give? Who's the guy you give the machine gun? Who walks on point? Who's the radio guy? Also, what's going on in their lives that might potentially impact their abilities? Where are they from? Are they having disagreements with family back home? Whatever it may be. You just think about people in such a fundamentally different way. And you meet people from every walk of life. So it all becomes inspiration, tools that you can build upon. Number two, stories are about conflict. I don't say this lightly. What stakes are bigger than life or death? Literal life or death. The conflicts of just trying to survive, dealing with military hierarchy, bureaucracy, sometimes systems that work against you. Again, these all become understandings of the frameworks of stories that can add to your toolkit to help you become a better writer. Number three, Military is teaches you really quickly to figure out what's actually going on, right? Like if I'm writing about something going on in a house, writers who have a different experience, they might talk about the trees outside the house, the wind blowing through the grass, the moon coming through the clouds as you're walking into it. And it's like, yeah, I get it. You're establishing a setting, you're establishing a shot, but like what's going on, right? When you're in the military and you go into a room, you get pretty figure out what it's good. Good writing is, in general, is crisp, it's economical, and it's precise. And the military teaches you those things. Number 4, it's discipline, absolute discipline. When you are writing something of novel length, you are spending thousands of hours with yourself, or if you're obnoxious like me, other people. Yes, I'm that guy who goes to Starbucks and tries to be all cool while I'm doing it, but it's a lonely affair. It's a really lonely, challenging thing. And I think the routines, the disciplines, the sense of fortitude that everybody gets just being in the military and in the day-to-day regimen of it is a tool that you can use to influence your writing. So everybody out there who is a writer should become a writer, is a veteran, should become a writer, because your stories are important, and we can help you at veteranswriting.org.
All right. Well, I agree on all of those points. I would counter, however, I've been in some meetings and some briefings with some awfully long-winded people who do not understand the point of be brief, be brilliant, and be gone. Very much so. So yeah, probably not the best writers. I'm just going to say I've served with a couple of them. I know a couple of them now, and man, oh man, they make a meeting that should last 45 minutes, 2 hours, and I'm just ready to hit myself in the head with a tack hammer.
In general, Mark. In general. Yes,
in generalities, you are correct. Yes. I, for the record, and I pride myself on this, am extremely brief. I say very little in meetings. I hold to the adage that I am a genius until I open my mouth and tell people that I'm not. So as long as I am quick and brief and to the point and get out quickly, everybody's all right. If they have questions, they'll ask. Other than that, I'm fine. I don't need to tell you my life story. We're good.
Yeah. Good. I'm always a proponent of this should have been an email instead, right?
Right, exactly. All right, guys, check out all Dario's work and information at DarioDiBattista.com, DIBATTISTA, DarioDiBattista.com. That's your website. It's got all your books and information, contact information. They can reach out to you there. And a little bit more on your biography and some of the other places that your work has been published. So I suggest you guys go to his website and look at him there and catch up, man. Listen, it's been great talking to you. I'm glad we connected on Twitter. I hope to continue to work with a relationship with you going forward. It's been a lot of fun hearing your story. And certainly I'm glad that you've inspired so many people along the way. We say this a lot on the show, that what you did overseas was super important, but sometimes it's the work you're doing after the fact that will have the greater impact. Whether we won the war or lose the war may not matter in the long term if there are people like you out there taking care of the veterans on the back end and allowing them to live a fuller life that they might not have had the opportunity otherwise. That may be the win that we're all looking for, that we can quantify and we know we can get.
And people like you, Mark, and it's an excellent point. If you're feeling some sort of way after the Afghanistan withdrawal, everything that's going on, find a vet service organization, get involved. It will make you feel better.
100%. So again, brother, it's great to hear your story. I can't wait to share it with everybody. And certainly thank you for your time. And Dario DiBattista, thank you for being part of the Hazard Ground.
It's been an honor, Mark. Thank you, brother.
You've been listening to Kill Cliff's Hazard Ground podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at producer@hazardground.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.